Okay, hello and welcome to the session. My name's Simon Wainwright. I'm a technology for education advisor for Plymouth City Council. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Mark Allen from Ed in the Clouds and 123 Go. So Mark is a freelance consultant and an experienced educator who's been delivering transformational change to schools for more than 10 years all across the UK and the world. He's also a Google certified innovator and a trainer, and he supports senior leaders and staff and schools to embed and effectively use Google tools for education. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Mark, and it's an excellent presentation. So I'm happy to hand over to Mark now to present 7 steps for a successful G Suite implementation.
Thanks very much, Simon, and greetings, everybody, whatever time of the day it is for you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. In this presentation, I know that the theme of the day is it takes a teacher, but I want to try and impress upon you that it takes leaders as well to create the kind of culture where great things can happen. If you haven't been listening to any of the other Education on Air talks, then I'd recommend them. And in particular, just before this one, Dylan William was talking about the creating a culture where teachers can improve their practice. And I'd highly recommend looking at that because it dovetails very nicely with this. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the slide deck. Just to amplify something that Simon said, I've worked now with a couple of hundred, maybe more schools over the last 10 years, helping them move to the cloud and to Google's tools for education. And I wish I could say to you that every single one of those projects had been a roaring success, but that wouldn't be true. Some have worked better than others, and some, quite frankly, have failed. And so last summer, I wanted to have a good look at what the recurring themes were, what were the common factors in the ones which had succeeded, and conversely, the ones which had failed. And this presentation is a result of that deliberation. It's, I hope, going to give you a methodology for maximizing the chances of success in your own institution when you're introducing G Suite for education, or indeed any other large change management program. So let me switch now to my slide deck. Okay, making it stick, 7 steps for a successful G Suite implementation. And as I've said, it takes a teacher, but it also takes a leader. The first thing we need to understand is that change is hard. Change is hard at the personal level and at the institutional level when a group of people try and change at the same time. Here, for instance, we have a very common theme. These 4 individuals, you may ask yourself, why has he put these up? Well, the truth is that whether it's Katniss Everdeen or Luke Skywalker or Frodo Baggins or Harry Potter, what we're seeing here is an ancient myth which in fact forms the basis of a theory of learning. This is known as the hero's journey, in which our hero, who's reluctant or maybe even ignorant of his own destiny, is given a quest that he or she may not want, and then goes through the trough of despond, has failings and setbacks, until there's some moment where it begins to make sense and it begins to feel possible. And then they go through a period of thinking, well, you know, I could do this, I can do this, I am doing this, and then I want to tell everybody else how to do this. And then returns with the elixir or the key or the ring or whatever the myth entails. This is sometimes used in a graphical format. This square root symbol typifies that, that journey. And the important point here is that the return platform is just a beginning of a new learning adventure. So we shouldn't be surprised that it always feels tough in the beginning. At the institutional level, there's even a model, the Kubler-Ross model, that explains the various emotional states that people go through, and indeed whole organizations go through as they're beginning to transform themselves. And I found that time and time again, that you're going to inevitably have people who feel that they can't take on board the changes, but gradually little things will happen which make it possible. And an interesting thing to consider here is the approach taken by the Team GB cycling organization, which used a system of marginal gains where little tiny things were shaved off previous practice to make it better. And that's a very strong theme that runs through successful projects, that if you give something to people that shaves a few seconds a day off something they do regularly, they'll begin to embed it in their working practice. Similarly, the Peloton approach that used by that Team GB cycling organization allows people to share the load of moving through the process, so that you don't have to be carrying the burden all the time. You can peel off and let somebody else carry it for you. But whichever way you do it, change is hard. In fact, if you want to know how hard it is, let's have a look at this. This is a picture of a child the very first time that they're exposed to fireworks. And if you watch the expression on this kid's face, you'll see that it is a whole world which has just changed. Everything that he thought he knew about the world has just been thrown in the skip, and that's what it feels like. And I've spared you the 7 minutes of screaming that follows this presentation, because that is a painful experience. Remember that learning happens outside your comfort zone, so don't expect it to be too easy. The 7 steps that we're going to look at follow a change management methodology, which I devised myself, but which turns out to be pretty common in many large organizations. In fact, Google themselves use a change management methodology that has many of these same components. We're going to be stepping through these one at a time, and of course you can return to this slide deck to look at this in more detail whenever you like. The first of these steps then is the leadership buy-in. I can say categorically that if the leaders in an institution, an organization, do not fully support the endeavor, then it is very difficult to make it stick. It's not impossible. You can do it by grassroots initiatives, but it's much, much simpler if the management, the leadership in the organization, walk the walk and in fact model the behavior that they want to see in others. If they don't, it makes everything much more difficult. And this may require a change of mindset, a way of doing things differently. If you know the expression from the saying from Einstein, the definition of stupidity is to keep making the same mistakes and to expect a different outcome. And let's have a look at a perfect example of that. Here's a situation where things have already got some design flaws in them. If you look on the right of this picture, there's a pub. In the center is the car park of the pub. And to the left, you can see somebody who came out of the pub, got into their car, and immediately forgot the distinction between forward and reverse motion and has ended up in the drink. The immediate reaction of the men, and it always is men who are standing around, is that we're going to need some big equipment to solve this problem. We're going to throw some muscle at the problem. But those of you who teach science will recognize that we have a very heavy object. We've got 2 or 3 cubic meters of water on the end of a long lever here, and that's not a very stable situation. And it doesn't take long for the thing to get quite unstable. Now, this is the point. We all have disasters, things go wrong, but this is the point where changing in thinking is required. Unfortunately, we're dealing with humans here, and in particular with men, and their response is, we're going to need a bigger crane. So they set out and get the larger crane, and at first everything is going very well, but, and I really don't think I need to show you the next slide, before long that too ends badly. Now, in reality, this is fake. If you drill into the pixels on this image, you'll see that they're not quite right. The shadows are not quite right. And somebody who's very talented has spent a long time falsifying this image. Just as an adjunct to that, I'd say one of the essential life skills that we need to be inculcating in our young people is the ability to discern fakes online. How do you know if you can trust what you look at? And I would suggest that a process of triangulation where they check from people they trust what's thought about certain stuff is a very useful skill, so an essential digital skill. But here we're talking about the changes that are required in leaders. So for leaders to buy into the project, I spend a lot of time with them at the beginning to try and flush out those blockages they've got, whether they're mental or organizational or infrastructural. We want to find out what it is that's going to stop the leaders getting 100% behind the project. And that as we step through this, I'm going to suggest some tools which could be useful. Many of them, in fact, the vast majority of these are G Suite tools, because it offers an integrated platform that really gives you the tools you need for almost any eventuality. Here, I'd suggest that forms could be used to capture the feelings of the leadership team before the project starts. Use a site to build a portal where they can begin to share things they find online. And in a similar way, use Drive and a private Google Plus community to get the conversation going and to get them to open up to the things that they're worried about in the project. Here are some examples of what those might look like. An SLT, senior leadership team audit, can go out. You can build a Google Plus community and use Hangouts often to get the conversation really going so that the leadership team understand where you're going and can buy into that journey. The second step is a whole school audit. Here we're going to have a look at those same blockages and barriers to change which are throughout the school, how people feel about the internet connectivity and the Wi-Fi, how they feel about the devices and the network and the logins that you ask them to do, and what it is that's stopping them embracing new ways of working in their classroom. Here's a set of things that we could check, for instance. None of these are actually necessary in many schools these days, but they're pretty much all there. And why is that? Why are we doing things just that way? Because we've always done them that way. So why do you have network drives? Why do you have piles of paper and out-of-date textbooks in your schools? And can we question these and say, are they valid? Should we consider changing them? And we need to get that out of everybody in the school, all the adults in the school, so that we can learn where those barriers are. Sometimes those barriers, by the way, will be in the soft power structures. It's not necessarily the organization chart that will tell you where the power is inside an organization. It can be people like the classroom assistants who are able to effectively block or prevent a project from really taking off by passive resistance or some other means. So use forms to discover the real state of the tool set, skill set, and mindset of your organization. You need to prepare the environment, and that will mean all kinds of things. But again, let's look for those barriers which are not real but perceived. Sometimes people will say to me, well, we would love to do that, but we can't because our bosses won't let us, or the Department for Education says that's not permitted, or the inspection regime that we have prevents that kind of change. And sometimes those things are not actually true. They are self-imposed barriers and blockages. We need to make sure that we flush out all of those to deal with them before the project begins. Here you can use the admin console in the G Suite setup to configure the domain to work exactly as you want it. Get your usernames and your groups and your sharing settings and the way that the apps and services behave. Get it so it reflects your philosophy for learning. And in all of this, the technology should be bent to fit the philosophy and not the other way around. Make sure you have the best internet connection you can afford. It's going to fill up, but make sure it's as good as it can be. Get the Wi-Fi to work everywhere. I mean, very often teachers will put up with a working environment inside schools that they wouldn't tolerate in a McDonald's restaurant where everything just works. If you look at the next time you're in a McDonald's, everybody's on a device, they're all connected, and there hasn't been an issue in getting there. So why is it so difficult in schools? The next thing we need to look at is communicating the message. We need to get the message out about why we are making these changes, when they're going to happen, how they affect you, and what is expected of you, and where you can turn for the resources and the help you might need in order to join in with the journey. Now, once again, we've got perceived barriers at play here, and I'm just going to play a short video which exemplifies that.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
Now, it turns out that, once again, that's fake. It was, in fact, a Sony PlayStation commercial from several years ago. But we kind of want these things to be true because they do exemplify something that we know through common sense, that self-imposed limits are often inherited, that people think, well, we would love to do that, but we can't do that here because things just don't work here. That very often isn't true, and part of my job is to challenge that. Back then to selling the message with your team. It's important to understand something that Google explained very well. Google's own change management guru, Kim Wiley, explains very well that you need to repeat the message several times. In fact, they say 7 times before you get through to people and make them understand that this journey involves them as well. Simply putting something in an inbox to people saying, hey, we're introducing this new program, isn't going to have any impact at all. You need to replace this with posters and communication of several different types in the run-up to the launch. And again, Google provides a great set of tools here: the docs and slides and mail, Hangouts, sites, and drawings. So, for instance, I quite often create posters. These are made using Google Drawings, a much more competent and powerful tool than many people realize, to get the message out there and have this in the toilets, on the coffee table, in the lift, have it everywhere that people go, so that they begin to understand that, hey, there's something happening here. If you can link it to some kind of theme, if you're going to launch on Valentine's Day, make that the theme. If you're going to launch on Independence Day, focus it on that, so that there is even some dressing up and a bit of a buzz around the whole program if you can. The next step is that you need to create a culture where it is possible to make mistakes. It is a culture where risk is accepted and even expected. And very often we have a problem here, which is almost age-related, that many teachers in schools feel that they've been overtaken by the world, that technology is happening to them. And this isn't necessarily related to age, but often is, that in particular teachers nearer the end of their career feel that it doesn't involve them. So if I switch to the next thing, you'll see that this is the situation that we kind of face, that 4-year-olds are coming in to school now completely fluent in the usage of devices, not necessarily very skillful at understanding why they should use devices. They're also agnostic, so you can throw an Android tablet or an iPad at a 4-year-old, and it doesn't take them very long, even if they're unfamiliar with one, to get used to it. So let's not get hung up on certain devices being the answer to anything. After all, these devices are the worst things that these kids are going to use in their life. So we're not going to hang it all on this one hook of the iPad or the Android tablet or whatever it might be, being some kind of silver bullet. As ever, it's teaching that matters, not the devices that we're using for it. In creating a culture where that kind of learning can happen, once again, Google provides a number of tools. Calendar is not very scary, not very sexy, but it's incredibly effective at getting across the idea that you are participating in a shared experience. If you're on the bus going home and you put something in the calendar from your phone, your colleagues get to see that immediately. You're getting the idea of being part of something to be present in everyday life within the school. Use Hangouts to do webinars for the same thing. Use sites to build a space where people can start to share things easily and to find the resources that they need in order to participate. And very importantly, create a private Google Plus community where you can begin to encourage that culture of sharing again. Here are some examples of that. And you'll see that in the top one, for instance, I'm using classic Google Sites in order to build an environment which brings together the news of everything that's going on in the organization, the tools that we want to encourage the teachers and others to use, and a library of resources so that everything they need can be found through this one interface. And this idea of a digital staff room is incredibly useful. I would also have that on a flat screen TV in the staff room, in the common room, so that people get used to the idea of being connected to the activity and not having it as something that they just look at for 5 minutes when they start the day, but it's there all day long, updating people on what's going on. Calendars, as I've mentioned, can be very important, but really important is this notion of a community. And the community goes through several phases. You can never tell in advance what character the community is going to adopt. But you notice a certain number of recurring themes. And when people start out with a shared community, and sharing doesn't come easily to everybody, when people start out, they often put up motivational posters and humorous videos that they found on the web and that kind of thing. But gradually you'll see them starting to share their best practice. So in many schools I work with, it's the teaching assistants, for instance, who capture learning behavior in the classroom and publish that and say, here we are, this is what we did in our class today. But what I really love to see is when people start admitting to weakness in these communities, when they say, hey, I tried some Forest Schools stuff today and it really didn't work. Can anybody tell me why that is? Because that means that they've come to trust the community. They know it's a safe place where they can admit to weakness and failings and they're not going to get laughed at. And that's a really important step towards them building up their PLN, as you have all done, no doubt, and realizing that they're not working in isolation, that their school isn't an island, that they can connect to a worldwide network of educators who can help them, who've already made the mistakes so they don't need to. The next step we're going to look at is training. And again, this is about helping the adults in the school get over the fact that probably every kid in the school is more competent on the devices than the adults are. This is a fact of life these days. It's been this way since the video recorder was introduced. And here I'm going to just start again a little video which exemplifies that.
I am the master of entertainment. I know how to control your TV. I know which remote controls which box. I know how to cast boxes from the tablet. I'm the only one who can find that episode you missed. I know how to connect the laptop to the TV. I know that season 2 isn't in the same place as season 3, and I'm going to show you this and also the next thing. We are the masters of entertainment because we are 7. You are not. You need help.
Virgin TV is here. The TV you love, brilliantly brought together.
So you get the idea that every 7-year-old is smarter at this stuff than their parents. And that maybe is just the way the world is from now on. But again, you can help your people by creating an environment that gives them all of the help they need in a variety of different formats. Google themselves provide some great resources in this regard. The Training Center and the Learning Center both got excellent resources in them. But you can customize and build your own versions of this. So I very often, as I've shown, create a digital staff room and an online professional development area that will give people access to the materials they need. And Simon referred in his introduction to something called 123 Go, which in a shameless piece of self-promotion is my new professional development product I'm launching in January, which is based on the fact that I've done hundreds of teacher training sessions and always have the impression that however good the feedback scores at the time, that it's difficult to make things stick. And so providing a set of micro credentials, bite-sized chunks online, just seemed like a natural thing to do, and I've built that program now. So we have a variety of resources, but it's not just the online resources that people need. You could consider putting in place programs like digital leaders or change champions, where people know who to turn to for human help as well as screen-based help. And a couple of things. Sometimes it's much easier for an adult to take training from a 10-year-old than it is from another so-called expert adult. Also, if you're building teams of change champions, don't just include your most talented and geeky colleagues. Make sure that you've got somebody in there who isn't seen as very competent, who isn't a digital native. And that way, you're removing the possibility of anybody else saying that it's not for me, because, you know, if Marjorie can do it, then everybody can. Lastly, the last step in my change management methodology is to look at review. And that's because this thing doesn't stop when you go live. And you have to keep constantly doing the perhaps uncomfortable job of considering, well, what do we let go? What do we keep? What do we develop? And it isn't any good to sit on the fence with this stuff. Sorry about the very poor analogy here, but it's true that you know, sitting on the fence in many ways is the worst thing to do. Let's just prove how bad it can be. There we go. Sitting on the fence often ends in disaster. And for me, this means things like, if you are considering perhaps 2 alternative cloud platforms, and you leave to your people the choice of which to go with, that isn't always the best thing to do. It can be done brilliantly, and I know places where that's happened, but often if you leave people the choice between something with which they're familiar and something new, there's no question that they'll stick with what they know. And that's, as Ford said, you know, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. People rarely go for the innovative. Here, in the terms of after the go live, reviewing what's happened and seeing whether it's worked, use forms, again, use sites, use shared documents, use shared resources in Drive, and use that Google Plus community to make sure that people are having a frank and robust exchange of views about what is working and what's not. So there you have it. Those were the 7 steps that we looked at. I hope they make sense to you, but you may tweak them because perhaps the preparation has been done by an external IT company and you don't need to get involved in that. But in all of this, the aim, it seems to me, is to make this like the air that we breathe, to make this so that the environment just supports a culture of risk-taking and learning, and a culture in which every single person in the organization is moving forwards and improving their skills all the time. As Dylan Williams said, that's the way that we're going to improve. So that is my presentation. Thanks very much for paying attention. And I'm going to stop the presentation now and switch back to Simon, and we can see if there have been any questions in the last 20 minutes or so.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. We haven't had specific questions, but I did have a question for you around the importance of senior leaders supporting staff for their self-directed learning. How important would you say that was?
I think it's crucial. So as I said in the presentation itself, if the leaders aren't walking the walk and actually modeling the behavior, however hard that might be, then you don't create the right kind of culture, and you give people the permission to opt out of the process. The best example I've heard of that was a head teacher I know in a large primary school in this country, who every September at the beginning of the school year would stand on the stage in front of all of the children in the school with a musical instrument that he'd never touched before, and he would declare his intention to learn that instrument by the end of the school year. And then once a month he would stand on stage and play that instrument, however excruciating that might be for the audience. And in particular, in one year, I think he chose the bagpipes, and it was there was a lot of pain involved over the following months as he realized and demonstrated just how difficult that could be. But, you know, that's a great example of somebody saying, I'm learning too. None of us have the answers here. We're all making this up as we go along and learning from the process, but supporting people to make mistakes, as I say, to create that culture where it is fine to try something that doesn't work. What's not so fine is to make the same mistakes twice and 3 times, because you're not learning from that process.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We just had a question come in, if we've got time for one quick question from Nicole. How do you deal if you've got enthusiastic staff but leaders don't want to buy in? She often sees leaders who are happy for a few teachers to lead, but the process, but do not get involved themselves.
Yeah, I'm afraid this is a tragedy of our times, that I see this all the time, that there might be pockets of enthusiasm, an oasis of good practice in a school, but very often the leadership, and let's be sympathetic to them as well, very often the concerns of leaders are not strategic. They're operational and tactical. They are, how do we improve boys' reading? How do we get attendance to look better? How do we get people over that CD boundary by which we are measured as a school? And it means that the focus is very often short-termist. If you're in a situation where you are that enthusiastic teacher doing great things in your classroom, or wanting to do great things in your classroom, but you can't engage your leadership, you've got 2 choices really. I think, you know, sometimes it is the right thing to consider whether you need a move to a culture where you can express yourself more fully, if it really is banging your head against a wall and you don't think that change will ever happen. Or you can keep chipping away and just get the, in particular, the children to be your salesman for you, and start talking about the great things that are going on in your classroom. And of course, the results speak for themselves as well. So if they improve, all the better. Then that will have people asking, well, how did they do that? How did they achieve those improvements? I would say also that at a national level and possibly a global level, change is happening anyway. The Department for Education in this country has already published a couple of guides to schools that want to consider working in the cloud. And they're going to apparently publish some more in which the direction of travel is made much more explicit. In fact, the last one is likely to say something like, we really want you to move to the cloud and you have 2 years to do it. And so there is no standing still in this. Schools that don't, as I would say with companies and IT companies that don't embrace the cloud, are going to get left behind. And nobody, school leader, however much of a Luddite they might be, nobody wants that. So it is all moving, maybe at a geological pace, but it's all moving in the right direction. And so if you have the patience to stick at it, I think good things will happen. But in some instances, there isn't time. You have your own career and well-being to think about as well. And you may need to consider moving. Not something I'd advocate, but I certainly wouldn't hold somebody back if they thought that they were never going to get their point of view across.
Great, thank you. That's probably all we've got time for, Mark, I think.
Okay, well, that's absolutely fine by me. The presentation, I think, is made available to everybody. So my email address, my Twitter account is on there. If you have any questions at all, please do come back to me. And feel free to pass this address on to your friends and colleagues so they can watch it later. And enjoy the rest of the day. There are some great speakers, and you know, it's a fabulous initiative by Google.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thanks everybody for watching, and catch you soon. Bye-bye now. And thanks to you, Simon, for introducing me.
Thank you.